Hello and welcome to Spellcasting 101. My name is Devin Hunter and I am very excited to be joining you today for this particular class. 101 is hopefully not going to be too boring. If you are somebody who has been around for a while, hopefully you are still going to be able to find some valuable information in here. If you are new to the craft, I hope that this helps you put pieces together and answers questions that you may have that you're not getting answers to. I know when I first started the craft, there was a lot of protocol and there were a lot of opinions, and the internet didn't exist back then. So I imagine nowadays it's really hard to find what you feel is solid information on the craft. And so I hope that when it comes to spell crafting and spell casting, you find the tools and the pieces that you need to further your study and to further your relationship to witchcraft. Generally, when I talk to people about witchcraft and starting out the process of casting spells, there are a couple of questions that come to mind immediately. And I always end up finding myself answering these questions over and over and over again. And so I thought we would start the class off by answering some of these questions, and particularly the witch's relationship to the ideas of safety, ethics, and how all of that relates to their energy. The first question I tend to get asked is, are spells and magic safe? And the answer is mostly. We can't always guarantee safety, especially when we are tampering or dabbling or dipping into energies that are normally considered to be aggressive or maybe low in frequency. But for the most part, if you are practicing with critical thinking skills, you are checking in with your spirits and your guides, and you are living your life, including your magical life, to your own ethical standards, then things are usually pretty good. The second question I tend to get asked is, what risks do you run by casting a spell? And the truth is that there are risks involved in every spell, or at least potential risks involved in every spell. The first type of risks that we could potentially run into are energetic and psychic in nature. These include energetic feedback, which is the idea that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is the concept that by sending something out, we could essentially end up bringing that energy closer to us. Usually this works for us in magic, but when we are talking about the negatives or the possible risks involved, this is also something that we have to keep in mind. The second is energetic contamination. And this is, again, one of those things that can usually work out for us in witchcraft and magic. We can take and use this to our advantage, but it's also something that we have to keep in mind. This is the concept of the law of contagion. And this is the idea that if something containing an energy comes in contact with something else, that other thing that it comes in contact can absorb or potentially be contaminated by that energy. The next is energetic attraction. And this is pretty simple. It's the idea that like attracts like. If you're putting out a certain type of energy continuously out into the universe, chances are you're going to end up attracting that energy to you in return. And the last type of common energetic risk that we can run into is the idea that we can create even more blocks in our path for the things that we're trying to manifest. And so sometimes doing magic and putting extra energy into something can actually have the opposite reaction to what it is that we're actually trying to create. Next, we have physical or mundane risks. And these are usually minimal outside of a few instances, but most notably, we're going to run into a couple of things, and we should always keep these in mind. The first is unintentional or erratic manifestation, and this is when energy related to the working manifests outside of sync with the spell. An example of this is a spell to gain social media followers unintentionally results in you getting into a fight on Twitter, or a spell to help you remember important information also results in bringing up trauma from your past. Other physical and mundane risks include the destabilization of current life patterns. If you've been building or you've been working to have a certain type of life or certain lifestyle, we run the risk whenever we cast a spell to affect our lives that our patterns are going to be adjusted, and we have to be aware and prepared for that. Another thing is that the physical manifestation of energetic and psychic risks can happen. And what this means is that with energy contamination or energetic attraction or energetic feedback, we run the risk of those things becoming physical in the way that they are expressed. But it isn't all bad, and it doesn't have to be scary, as much as those risks and warnings can play out in that way. I don't want to scare you off. The truth is that for the most part, magic is pretty harmless. It's just all about how you approach it, which brings me to the next question that I often get asked. How do you keep yourself safe as possible when practicing magic? There are a couple of things that you can do. The first is develop skills that will help you keep focused and calm when under pressure. This is something that took me a long time to realize, but the truth is the more focused and calm that you can be under any situation, regardless of the amount of pressure, the more potent your focus and magic are going to be. Invite your spirit guides and guardians to be part of this process. Every single spell that I cast, every ritual that I do, even when I go into meditation, before I do any of those things, I ask for my spirit guides, my guardians, any entity or energy that I'm working with that could be, related to the working. I ask for them to be part of it. Seek out as much information as possible through divination and research. This may sound pretty simple, but the truth is this is easily one of the most overlooked steps when it comes to creating effective spells that are going to keep us safe. The more information we get about the people, places, things that are involved in our magic, the more we're going to be able to have an effect over those things, and the more that we're going to be able to understand their effect on us. Work on your inner demons through shadow work. One of the things that I am finding myself say all the time, even in advanced magic classes, is the idea that spirits and other energies can use our weaknesses against us. And if we are trying to really be in control and really be powerful people, it's really important that we also go through and we take care of our skeletons that are in our closets, any inner demons that may be tormenting us, and we go through a process of purifying ourselves in that way. That's going to keep energy and entities from being able to use our weaknesses against us. Start from a place of stillness and check in with your senses. It is easy, and I know it sounds easy, but it's another one of those things that a lot of people tend to overlook. But just take a few moments, take a deep breath, check in with your mind, your body, and your spirit, and make sure that everything is in balance and that you feel you can truly be in the moment. You can also do things that will help add extra protective barriers around you while you're performing your working, such as casting a circle, casting a sphere, or casting a cone. And these are all things that we will get into later, but casting a circle is something that everyone can do. It's really easy to find information on this anywhere online, and we will be getting into things like spheres and cones in Spellcasting 201. All right, now we're going to move on to ethics. Ethics are relative to the situation, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to ethics and magic ever. This is one of the things that we tend to talk a lot about in witchcraft, especially in the beginning. But as we develop, we understand that not everything is going to be black or white. Magic isn't black or white. And so when we're approaching the idea of ethics, we have to be really careful to keep in mind that ethics are tricky, and we should always avoid making rash judgments about them. So when I was in college, I took a business ethics course, and one of the stories that my professor told us at the time has always stuck with me, and I apply this to the concept of ethics and magic a lot. So just follow along and kind of imagine with me. You are walking home one day, and while you are passing the supermarket, you see a woman stealing fresh meat from the back of a delivery truck. So ask yourself this question. Is she acting ethically? Yes or no only. Okay. You then find out that she has a history of doing this. Would you say that this person is an ethical person? Yes or no only. You then learn that she has 5 children at home and very little means to support them. They aren't even her kids. She just ended up taking them in when their parents fell on hard times. Would you say that she is an ethical person? Yes or no only. You finally learn that the meat she was stealing was to feed those children. Would you say that she is an ethical person? Yes or no? The more information we get about a situation, the more empathy we tend to develop for the often quote-unquote unethical person. What may look unethical to one person isn't necessarily unethical to another. Is stealing unethical? Yes, theft is wrong. Are people who steal unethical? Well, not always. Is it possible for unethical things to happen so that ethical things can also happen? Well, that depends on the situation. There is no monkey on your back that will smack you when you do something unethical with your magic, but you will always have to deal with the risks of any spell that you cast. This brings us to the threefold law, which is something that we tend to talk a lot about as we're moving from beginning witchcraft into intermediate witchcraft. Because the concept of the threefold law is not actually universal in witchcraft. It is something that only a few traditions, and usually they are those who are directly related to Gardnerian Wicca, actually adhere to. But if we were to look at folk magic, or we were to look at magic systems that exist outside of that Wiccan sphere of influence, there's no such thing as the threefold law. And the belief and understanding from scholars and from practitioners is that the threefold law was actually something that was created in order to help the public become more comfortable with us as witches, the idea of witches. So if witches couldn't cast any spells that were going to hurt you because it would hurt them, then it was it was kind of putting kid gloves on us, and it made us a little bit more palatable to the public. But in actuality, if you are functioning with the threefold law as part of your magic, then it's going to become part of your magic. However, if you don't function with it as part of your magic, then it's not going to be part of your magic. So it's entirely one of those mental constructs that you can accept or you could reject. And most of us, if you again are talking about intermediate and advanced spellcrafters, we don't really pay attention to the idea of the threefold law because it isn't something that we ourselves find presenting itself in our craft. Karma, or the concept of karma, also has very little to do with what we do in spells and witchcraft. The idea of karma is actually tied up and rooted in Buddhist philosophy, and it's the concept that we are able to remove ourselves through a process of evolution from the cycles of reincarnation. This is something that is very specific to the concepts of reincarnation and the concepts of, essentially the ascension of the soul. However, it has nothing to do with witchcraft. And so the idea of what goes around comes around, that's not karma. That is actually a misuse of the term. However, what we are dealing with is that idea of that like attracts like. And I think that that's a much better way to approach the idea of quote unquote karma in witchcraft. I think the idea of ethics is important for a lot of us. We want to live ethical lives, but I think ultimately the best way to decide what is ethical or unethical is to ask yourself that question. If you are a good person and you want to do good things, then you're going to find the question of ethics to be something that is pretty straightforward for you because you already have constructs that'll inform you on how to make those decisions. If you're somebody who's questioning what's ethical and what's not ethical, then you should go study the concept and the topic of ethics and see how you stack up and relate to those things as they're being presented. But ultimately, no one can teach you how to be a good person. There is no need for laws to teach you how to be a good person. These are responsibilities that you have. And so when we think of ethics, those are completely up to you. And again, those are relative to every single situation I think that we're going to find. However, we can focus on something like standards. Standards are different from ethics in that you are constantly able to revise them. You are able to raise your standards when needed, but it's something that you get to set, and these are things that you get to decide. Standards are set based on goals, comfort level. Standards are set based on goals, comfort level, personal ethics, and boundaries. Examples would include: because my personal goal is to attract as much positive energy into my life as I can, I'm only going to do workings with an intentional positive impact. Or, I will not curse someone unless there is absolutely no other option. Another might be, as a vegan, I think it is unethical to harm animals, so all of the magic I perform will be cruelty-free and sustainable. These are all perfectly acceptable and obtainable standards that can help those who adopt them continue on the road that they choose to follow. Energy. Energy follows the path of least resistance. It is always affecting you, at least ambiently. And whether you know it or not, you are part of the flow of universal energy. It can be cultivated from a multitude of sources, from within, from the environment, from culture, from spirits and deities, from stars, from flora and fauna, from minerals, and from your own actions. As we go on throughout this course, we will be touching on the concepts of energy over and over again. But most importantly, it is vital that you remember that you are part of an energetic web, and that when we are casting spells, you are tapping into this web and you are altering this web. When you cast a spell, you are sending vibrations through this web, and those vibrations will be felt not only by yourself, but by those around you. Be conscious, be dedicated, and be focused when you are approaching any type of spell work. There are a lot of theories and ideas out there that people have regarding how magic manifests. Sadly, we don't always have empirical data to back our claims, which makes it easy to fall into two common traps. The first is the pseudoscience trap. Pseudoscience is fake or misleading scientific research or methodology that is often cherry-picked to provide results in favor of a bias. It's essentially fake news. We want to be careful not to cite pseudoscience as a way of rationalizing or explaining away our experiences as occultists. And there are ways that we can avoid this. Look for other researchers who are doing similar work and look into their opinions on the topic. Good science is peer-reviewed, and it is going to be able to be duplicated, often in a laboratory setting. If these things aren't in play, chances are you are looking at under-reviewed or pseudoscience. The second trap that you can fall into is the faith without reason trap, which is when you base everything solely on faith and avoid all rational contrary thought. This is why it is important that as you mature as a witch, you develop an approach to magic that both allows you to see things logically while also allowing you space to suspend your disbelief. You should feel confident when discussing the subjects of magic and the occult with those who are not themselves witches. Engaging in meaningful discussion with others in a way that allows you to feel intelligent and respected is important to how you see yourself as a witch, even if only in the eyes of those who are close to you. Being able to confidently discuss the logic and reasoning behind your work as a witch with others allows you to find and build a deeper sense of understanding and purpose as a witch. If you run into someone who is opposed, and their argument is based solely on spiritual or religious views, then you are more easily able to shrug that off as you already know they don't come from the same place that you do. However, when someone comes at you with science or reasoning, you have to be able to hold your own in a conversation. Doing this successfully will cement your practice as a real part of everyday life, just as much as any other natural phenomenon. When you feel truly challenged by science or reasoning, take that as a chance to invite a new degree of understanding into your practice. To quote Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Clarke's first law: when a distinguished but elderly scientist states that something is possible, he is always certainly right. When he states that something is impossible, he is very probably wrong. Science has not refuted magic. It has merely refuted the claims of those who do not understand the scope of both studies. The occult is full of scientists, doctors, lawyers, philosophers, engineers, and all manner of people who live very scientific and logic-driven lives. You don't have to forsake science in order to believe in magic, psychic, or occult forces. You merely need to understand that we exist in the place where one ends and the other begins. Magic and the occult are inherently difficult to describe and explain to others. You have to accept that there will always be a degree of skepticism unless someone experiences it for themselves, and most people aren't going to be up for a demonstration. Be prepared for people to not believe you no matter what you say. It isn't your job to convince the world that magic exists, just that you are able to convince yourself that it does. When I explain how magic works to people, I tend to stick to a few main points and I leave the rest up for discussion. Number 1. Magic depends on a few things that do require faith, or at the very least that you can, quote-unquote, suspend your disbelief. This means that logic will fail us if we attempt to include it in our immediate observations or actions. We need to be able to push the pause button on or suspend our disbelief in things that are not logical. Number 2. At the core of occultism is the understanding that we are part of and can influence a grand design, and that we can obtain access to the unknown creator of that design through ritual and observation. Number 3. As part of this grand design, everything has both a physical and psychic presence, often referred to as quote-unquote vibration. Spells and other forms of magic use these vibrations to affect a person, environment, or outcome. These vibrations are often felt and not seen directly. A good example is the vibe we get off of another person or even a house. Number 4. On a psychic or spiritual level, we understand spells to work through accessing these vibrations and then weaving them together to create some sort of influence. We often do this through spoken word, sensory aid, as well as music and the creative arts. Number 5. At the very least, we are creating experimental art that helps us to map out our own thoughts. At the very best, we are accessing hidden planes of power and tugging at the hidden strings that connect all things. Either way, no harm, no foul. Remember to do your research and to develop critical thinking skills around the theories behind why a spell is cast a certain way. By looking at things from this perspective, you are going to gain a much better insight into how all of this works and how you may better approach it. A few things to keep in mind when creating and designing effective spells. Effective spellcrafting requires that we have a multi-pronged approach to our work. We should always keep as above, so below in mind. On one hand, it means that what we see in the astral becomes part of the physical. On the other hand, it means that we have to set the wheels in motion on both a spiritual and a physical level. Read spells and workings from other practitioners and see what resonates with you. Try those spells out, and then when you are ready, move on to creating spells from scratch. Drafting spells out before casting them is a great way to make sure that you have lined up everything before you take action. This is something that we will do in the next part of the class. Perform some sort of divination to find out the best approach for each working. Perhaps your initial idea isn't going to work the way you wanted it to, or maybe there is a better way for your energy to be used. Traditionally, spells are written in poetry and rhyme. There are many possible reasons for this, most likely because poetry utilizes rhythm and cadence to deliver a structured and complete emotive thought. Poetry also allows for nuance, which we tend to find lots of in spell writing. Your spells do not need to be written this way, but it is the most common for a reason. If you aren't sure where to start, rewrite the lyrics of a song to match the intention for your working to help get a feel for the flow of spell writing. You can also take a look at classical and famous poetry for inspiration. Spells use various ingredients with unique vibrations to assist in creating a desired influence. It is important not to just collect these ingredients and use them, but to thoroughly connect to each ingredient's vibration before working with them in magic. Simply holding the herb or curio in your hand and breathing over it until you feel the energy from it, and then giving it a simple instruction to lend energy to the working can go a long way in increasing the potency of your working. Do this before each spell or as you are collecting the ingredients so that you are ready to go when the time is needed. Every ingredient and its purpose should be mentioned in your working whenever possible. For example, I call luck with rosemary and patience with thyme, love with violets and a silver bell chime. Do not be afraid to use as much symbolism and nuance as possible, as they help to deepen the connection and vibrancy of your working. Reference mythology, stories, music, anything to help you paint the picture with words. For example, Like a serpent rising from the ground, I find my way homeward bound. Or, through the valleys and ancient seas, I call forth wisdom from the trees. Research the ambient influences like the current astrology and upcoming astrology. Whether we like it or not, working with these forces is way better than working against them. Sometimes a love spell is just going to have a better chance on a Friday because Venus has more dominion. No, you don't have to wait until Friday, but if you can, you probably should. Whenever possible, I recommend working with the influence of the planets and stars as a beneficiary of their energy, not as a victim. Think about the overall spell and its ability to be achieved in one working, or if it should be broken down into multiple smaller workings. We often want to attack a whole problem or situation at once, when in reality, breaking it off into smaller chunks is often more practical and effective. Okay, now let's take another look at energy. Energy is a somewhat nebulous term. We generally are referring to life force, also known as mana or ki, the vibration found emanating from something, current or residual, or psychic/metaphysical forces. To cast effective spells, you should be able to feel or sense these energies. It is important to know your own energies and things that affect them. Look to start every working out from a place of emotional and physical balance. Yes, emotions can feed psychic energy to a working, but emotions are also notoriously chaotic and unruly. You should never rely on emotion alone to fuel your workings. You don't always have to do a lot of prep work to get ready for a working, but at the very least, check in with your mind, body, and spirit and make sure that all parts of you are engaged in the process. If you don't feel focused, find a way to become focused through meditation or breath work or even EFT, also known as tapping. If you don't feel physically engaged in a working, it's going to struggle to manifest in the physical plane. Find a way to get your blood pumping before you start. If you don't feel spiritually engaged or at peace with the working, take that as a sign that something is off and recalculate your steps. Remember, we want to bring our entire selves to a working. We should also remain focused on the moment and avoid getting distracted by the past or the future until if or when it is time to work with those concepts. If you are worried about your own energy, perform a personal cleansing before the working. This is not always necessary, but it does help. You can also perform a personal cleansing after any working that deals with low vibrational energies or that leaves you feeling unsettled. Again, the items that you are working with contain their own energies, and you should prepare them before each working by identifying the energy and then holding it and psychically connecting to the vibration emanating from that object. After that, mentally instruct the object on how you want it to perform in your working. During a spell or ritual, you should always be aware of the energy present throughout your working. Notice how it shifts or changes and use that flow of energy to help you determine the flow of your working. You do not always need a magical container, but if you have any doubts about your working, you should perform it within one. There are many ways to formulate your magic, and there is really no wrong way to cast a spell as long as you understand what you are doing and why you are doing it. Some of the best ways to approach magic so that you remain in control of the energies and you can manage them, of course, is to write the spell or the working yourself. And this takes us to our final lesson in Spellcasting 101. The key reason for why some spells work while others do not are that spells that work tend to be thoroughly thought out, planned, and there is plenty of attention given to detail. Spells that tend not to work are going to usually be rushed and done in a heat of the moment kind of situation. We always want to avoid that whenever possible. So let's take a look at a few ways that we can write an effective spell. For this part of the class, if you would, go ahead and get out your journal or a piece of paper and a pen. Throughout this, you are going to be prompted to respond to questions, and if possible, then go ahead and pause the video at that point. If not, I will try to provide enough space in the lesson here for you to respond as fully as possible. Either way, make sure that you get all your thoughts out and that you use this information when you are actually crafting your spell. The first thing that we're going to do is frame our working. And in order for us to make this happen, we need to respond to a few questions. Number one, what is the reason for your working? Think about what makes you want to perform this working to begin with. Number two, what is the intention for your working? What do you intend to alter when you do this spell? Number three, what is your desired outcome for this working? How do you want the world to be changed by this spell? Now, if possible, perform a reading using your preferred method of divination and seek clarity about the working. I recommend asking the following questions. Number one, what do I need to know about the situation that I do not already know? Number two, what will happen if I do not perform this working? Number three, how should I approach this working? Number four, what types of resistance will my working likely encounter? Number five, what personal or inner work can I do to help bring this magic into reality? Take all the time you need to answer those questions. And if you can't do them immediately, then make sure that before you really go to sit down and to write out the working, that you do look into the energies that are going on around and behind the spell that you're trying to do by doing this form of divination. Again, you can use any method, whatever's comfortable for you. Just make sure that you do it. As we move on, we also want to identify all of our allies, at least the ones that are going to be working with us in this spell or ritual. The next thing we're going to do is to identify all of the allies that we are going to be working with. So ask yourself this question. Who are the spirit allies, gods, spirit guides, ascended masters, land spirits, etc., that I will be working with? Why, and how do I intend to approach them? This is where you clearly identify your intention for calling upon each spirit ally that you want to be part of your working, and how you intend to utilize their energy in that working. It is not advised to call upon a deity or spirit that you do not already have a relationship with. Next, you want to ask, what resources will you be cultivating energy from and why during this working? What are the herbs, minerals, correspondences, and other quote-unquote ingredients to your working that you will be using, and for what purpose? Next, we want to identify our methods. We need to determine the type of spell. What kind of working is this going to be? Is it a candle spell, a jar spell, a sewing spell, etc.? Next, we want to figure out our timing. What type of magical timing, if any, will we be working with and why? An example of this is that if you were doing a spell for more business, you might wait for a Thursday and do that working in the hour of Jupiter, because that is when you are going to get potent help from Jupiter in expanding your business. You also want to think about how much time this spell or this working is going to take, and if it's going to take multiple days, multiple candles, etc. Next, you want to think about the space that you're going to be using. What type of setup will you need to cast this spell or to perform this ritual? An example of this might be that you are going to be using an altar with a circle cast, or perhaps you're just going to use a cutting board and a clean counter with no protective circle at all. Next, you want to identify the tools that you're going to be working with. What magical tools will you be using and why? An example of this might be that you are working with a chalice so that you can use the energies of water in your working, or perhaps you're going to be working with a stick of incense so that you can work with the energies of air. And lastly, you want to be thinking about essentially what type of preparation you're going to need in order to do this working. What do you need to do to get ready, personally and for the space, with the ingredients, all of the above. An example of this would be that you have to perform a cleansing and go to the supermarket for supplies. Knowing all of these things in advance will really help you when you go to sit down to actually write the spell, which is the final thing here. So now that you have your information, you have an idea, you've got your concepts, you know who you're going to be working with and why you're going to be working with them, it's time to sit down and actually put it all together. Now remember, there is no wrong way to cast a spell. It is all in what you're doing and why you're doing it. And by writing our own work, we get to have a larger degree of control over our working and how it is going to manifest. And so I think if we are going to be developing our skills as a witch, one of the best places to start is through the development of our comfort when it comes to actually writing spells and casting spells. We really need to beef those muscles up. A few things to keep in mind when you actually go to cast your spell are that you do not want to approach the working from a place of being too meek and humble. You should approach every working from a place of authority and pride. This is going to go a long way in how you assert your actual dominance over the energies that you're working with, and ultimately the potency to which that energy is able to actually, go out and manifest and become part of the world itself. So we always want to approach our working from a place of strength, a place of balance, and again, it's really important that we remain in the moment while we are actually performing those spells and those workings. Another thing that I would often recommend for people who are casting a spell is that you take your time. If you don't feel like energies are moving fast enough, or you don't feel that energy has been raised enough, then continue to do whatever it is that you need to do in order to get to that place where you feel like it is time to move on. I have read spells that were, only supposed to take 5 minutes, but because I didn't feel like the energy was lining up the way that I wanted it to, it took me an hour. And I've done rituals that were supposed to take an hour, but because the energies lined up really well, it only took 20 minutes. It's really about listening to your internal sensors and making sure that you are feeling like things are going, smoothly, that energy is flowing around you. And when you approach something where there's an energetic block or there is maybe something in your way, take a few moments to observe that and to move through that. That is something that you also have control over as the witch. You know when a spell is over when you say it's over. You know when the working is done when you say it's done. The only caveat to this is that when you're done, you have to be done. You have to completely let it go. One of the things that we will discuss in the next part of our Spellcasting 100 series is how to determine whether or not a spell has been effective, or if it still needs a little work, or maybe you need to cancel that spell and start over. But for right now, the one thing that I would say to remember is that you have to trust your gut. No matter what situation you're approaching, no matter what type of spell you're going to be doing or working that you're going to be doing, if you listen to your gut, you will have all of the answers, you will have all of the guidance that you could possibly need. Again, starting off from a place of knowing where you are, knowing what your weaknesses are, knowing what your strengths are, and playing to those things when it's appropriate is really going to take your work to the next level. Spells that are personal, spells that come from the heart, spells that come from a well thought out place tend to be the spells that are the most effective. They tend to be the workings that have the most impact on the world around us. So if you leave here with nothing else, as long as you know that ultimately is if it feels right to you, if it feels like it is a good thing for you, if it feels that the energy is the way that you want it to be, then that's all you got to worry about. And your spells and your magic will ultimately work out quite well. But there is more to it than just intention, as you've seen. There is more to it than just belief, as you've seen. And a big part of that has to do with how you look at yourself and how you look at the ability for magic to actually manifest out in the world. Those simple things that we do that have nothing to do with the actual working that we are going to be performing. That idea of doing meditation and doing our demon work and taking care of, again, our weaknesses, knowing what our strengths are, all of those things ultimately shape the experience that we have as spellcasters. And so even if you're working on something and you feel like, oh, it's not directly related to the goals that I have in mind, take a step back and really question yourself with that line of thinking. Is this actually helping me out? Am I working out my muscles? Am I getting all of the information that I need in order to be as effective as I possibly can? There are a lot of things that we must consider when we go to sit down to actually work on a spell.